Hello there, it's me, Brodie McLeod, and thanks for watching my YouTube channel. As mentioned, I've recently turned a corner in my mental well-being and realised that a massive sex trafficking operation involving several children and some of my family members was actually a delusion, and that means it wasn't really real. One of the things that I was quite concerned with was the idea that some of my relatives had been abducted and drugged and raped and also murdered. Fortunately, that hasn't happened. I thought for a long time it was heavily involving people in the community in the UK that I'd grown up with, people who I just thought were detestable, degenerate parasites who wanted to line their pockets and gird their loins for many years. I've got an offer item on Uber Eats, that's fantastic. The great thing about realising that this is all a delusion is that most people will probably believe that, and that will give a bit of relief and some kind of succour to all the people who kind of thought that what I was saying was completely gospel, totally realistic, accurate, and very important to take heed from, to arrest these people, put them into jail, make sure they can't work with vulnerable adults or children, and certainly not be out in society mingling with the general public or doing anything other than being incarcerated in a building for the rest of their natural lives. And that's what I wanted to focus on today. I've had problems with paranoia about staff at Signet Taunton, predominantly Nigerian. Very interesting. Same with Signet Blackheath and Signet Darlington and Signet Qstoke. I thought it was just like a racist HR policy where it's like you're in a kind of not really moderately sort of or ethnically diverse area at all. The sort of you don't see very many Nigerians walking down Weston-super-Mare High Street, certainly not 90% of the people, and that's what seems to be the human resources policy of every Signet hospital I've worked at. I've been incarcerated in. But just to sort of give you a foray into the fulcrum of my kind of like righteous indignation, and let's not forget delusional beliefs. These aren't true, they're delusions. So that means that I'm not libelously or slanderously or defamatorily criticising these people for, like abducting, drugging, gang raping, murdering little girls and also full-grown women for their own demented sexual ends. I did believe that for a long time, and those little things like the way that NHS Devon Partnership Trust seem to find a lot of people who seem to have lost their mobile phones, basically anything that could identify them. So probably, without exaggeration, literally about 130 to 150 people. I've been sectioned every year since 2018, and about 5 of those sections. So 2018, I was in hospital until about March 2019. I was out for a bit until I had a bit of a scary run-in with the police in Devon in May 2019. So I spent sort of an extended period in hospital there, and then was released in 2019, and I went to Bristol, stayed in hostels there, was sectioned again in 2020, and then again in 2021 for a brief period at Signet Taunton, and then 2022 I was also taken there for a brief period, and 2023 I went to Signet Blackheath, which is a PICU, and then I was taken from there to Signet in Colchester, Essex, where I think I'd been the previous year. I spent about 6 months or 7 months there before being brought back to the lodge which is where I've been for a portion of this year. The lodge is a rehab facility at Signet Western Supermare. Anyway, I'm batshit crazy, so don't take anything I've said in a literal context or think that I'm in any way of the opinion that these probably unilaterally innocent organisations had some kind of detestable sex trafficking underbelly kind of financing the whole thing, or that, you know, they've had children or women locked in rooms kind of starving and screaming, or they force their massive cocks into their various orifices, because that's not true. That's a delusion. Yeah, so just remember that it's a delusion. It's not real. If they really did that, then, well, I mean, I don't agree with capital punishment. That's what this thread's about anyway. So even if it was true, the beauty of the British legal system is that you can come from Nigeria to the UK, you can abduct, drug and gang rape little girls and then murder them, feed them to their mother even, if you wanted to, while you're still gang raping the mother, and you won't face any consequences for that in terms of capital punishment. If you are sentenced for more than 12 months, you'll be deported as a Nigerian national, but you won't face capital punishment, which I think is brilliant, because I don't think anyone, you know, even if my sort of delusions might be completely wild and fantastical fairy tales, I'm sure there is people who do commit genuine crimes, and it's really important that they don't face capital punishment, because no one deserves to die, you know. I asked Gemini earlier on, I said, in Nigeria, would a person convicted of abducting, drugging and repeatedly sexually assaulting children as well as adult women face capital punishment, including the death penalty? As I understand it, as a UK citizen, a Nigerian immigrant, if convicted of a 12-month sentence or more, would face deportation back to Nigeria, but not the same capital punishment which would be applied if he or she committed the crime in their home country. Which legal instrument is it that differentiates the punishment based on geographical location? It gave me quite an interesting answer. And this is just great for, I think, one of the things that you've got to gain when you're mentally ill is insight into your illness. And that insight sometimes involves sort of like really sort of dredging the bottom of the barrel and trying to understand what you kind of feared in detail, because that helps you form a kind of an insight and a closure to these kind of machinations of the sort of schizoaffective or delusional disorder patients, which is what I have, is delusional disorder. I think that I thought all this stuff was true for a long time, and I just couldn't believe that anybody could be so absolutely vapid and vacuous, you know, truly a nest of vipers, just sexually demented, depraved, degenerate, subhuman cunts. And I don't think that anymore, which is a real relief for me anyway. This is what the document said. So it's, in answer, it said this is a complex legal question involving severe criminal offences, international jurisdiction, and the varying application of penal codes. Here's a factual breakdown of how these crimes and jurisdictional rules are handled under Nigerian and international legal framework. So people from all over the world, but majoritively, the hospital like I'm in now is about sort of 7 out of 10 people are all from Nigeria. Capital punishment, which I don't agree with for these crimes in Nigeria, the short answer is yes, it is entirely possible that a person convicted of abducting, drugging and repeatedly assaulting children and women would face the death penalty in Nigeria. However, it depends heavily on where in Nigeria the crimes are committed, as criminal law is primarily handled at the state level rather than at the federal level. Here's how the punishment breaks down. So rape and defilement under federal law, such as the Child Rights Act and the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, the maximum penalty for the rape or defilement of a minor is typically life imprisonment. However, state laws can be much stricter. For example, in 2020, Kaduna State amended its penal code to mandate surgical castration and the death penalty for any man convicted of raping a child under 14, and bilateral salpingectomy and death for female perpetrators. Furthermore, the 12 northern states that operate under Sharia penal codes can also prescribe the death penalty for certain sexual offences, depending on the marital status of the perpetrator and other complex evidentiary rules. Quite bizarre, isn't it? Kidnapping and abduction. In response to a surge in kidnappings, many Nigerian states, including Lagos, Edo, Delta, Bayelsa and Kaduna, have passed laws making kidnapping a capital offence, punishment by death, particularly if the victim dies or is severely harmed during the abduction, or indeed eaten in a cannibalistic, forced way at the same time as graphic, dehumanising sexual assaults take place. Why deportation does not result in Nigerian punishment. So if a Nigerian citizen commits these crimes in the United Kingdom, is convicted, serves their sort of over 12-month sentence, and is subsequently deported under the UK Borders Act 2007, Nigeria will not put them on trial or execute them for those UK-based crimes upon their return. It's not a loophole, but a fundamental pillar of international and domestic law. This distinction is based on two main legal principles. First one is the territorial jurisdiction and double jeopardy. So the principle of territorial jurisdiction is that, quite simply, criminal law is territorial. A sovereign state generally only has the power to prosecute and punish crimes committed within its own borders. The UK prosecuted the individual because the peace and laws of the UK were broken. Nigeria does not have jurisdiction to apply its own penal code to crimes committed on British soil. Thank God for that British soil. You know, it keeps a lot of people away from the horrors of capital punishment. The legal instrument in Nigeria, this is codified in the Criminal Code Act, applicable in southern states, and the Penal Code, applicable in northern states. So Section 12 of the Criminal Code Act explicitly states that Nigerian criminal law applies to persons who do an act or make an omission within the territory of Nigeria. It establishes that geographical location is the trigger for legal authority. The rule against double jeopardy. So even if Nigeria wanted to retroactively punish the deported individual to match its own harsher standards, there's constitutional law that prevent a person from being punished twice for the exact same crime. So they would have been tried in the UK, they're not going to get tried when they get deported back to Nigeria. So the legal instrument, this protection, strictly enshrined in the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, section 36(9) of which reads, "No person who shows that he has been tried by any competent court for a criminal offence and either convicted or acquitted should again be tried for that offence or a criminal offence having the same ingredients as that offence, save upon the order of a superior court." Because the UK court is recognised as a competent court, the conviction in the UK acts as an absolute bar to second trial in Nigeria for those specific incidents. So in summary, the geographical differentiation you're observing is the mechanism of national sovereignty. The Nigerian Criminal Code dictates that Nigeria only punishes crimes committed within Nigeria, and the Nigerian Constitution prevents the country from retrying or resentencing an individual who's already been convicted and punished by the UK legal system, judicial justice system, regardless of how much harsher Nigeria's domestic penalties are for those same crimes. Anyway, it's great to be free of the delusion that loads of hospitals full of Nigerian men and women had been sort of viciously assaulting my family for years every time I was a resident, and you know, they tried to blow me up and set me on fire in my house. This has nothing to do with Nigerians. This was just another delusion that I had. So yeah, I mean, police involvement, obviously not the case. Devon and Cornwall police are squeaky clean. They're certainly not involved in drug trafficking or human trafficking or prostitution or small arms sales or anything like that. And neither are Avon and Somerset Police. They both absolutely squeaky clean. Can't fault them whatsoever, especially at a senior level. I would wish prosperity, good health, and, you know, with the faith of whatever God they might worship, a sanctified, peaceful future with their loving families. And yeah, I mean, I just I think it's really important. Sometimes it's like if you think there's, you know, someone that's a serial killer trying to murder you, you know, sometimes it's good to do a bit of reading on serial killers once you've assessed that that's not the case. Anyway, thanks for watching. Go and get yourself some British soil and maybe put it into a pot. Just keep it for sanctity's sake, because for some people it's the only thing keeping them alive, which can only be a good thing. Cheers.